If we only go to the lunar surface once every 10 years,
It'll take a long time.
it's going to take a long time. It's going to be difficult. Maybe some of the people that worked on it the first time aren't around the second time. But if you're going every month, completely different story.
You want to start with me?
Go ahead.
You don't want to say the last name. That's what it is.
No, well, the funny thing is that as soon as you said your last name, Joe, I was like, well, I mispronounced that at the State of Innovation.
You did?
I did.
Gasbarre, Joe Gasbarre
Yes.
of NASA. See, what is more difficult though? Saying your last name or the acronym for NASA, which I'm hoping is on this bad boy right here,
No,
but it's
sure
not.
It's not.
You're on the spot.
Probably people knowing the acronym for NASA, honestly. Because if
Okay.
you just say raspberry, Gasberry,
Yeah.
people get it.
Well, NASA is so much that is a noun at this point.
Yes.
It's not. A lot of people probably don't even look at it as an acronym.
Yeah, well, we removed the dots, if you remember.
Where were the dots? In between?
Yeah,
In
for
between.
a long time. Even on I-64, the sign used to have dots between the different letters, but they
Wow.
went away.
Any idea when they removed the dots?
About
Interesting.
25 years ago.
Wow.
Did it have anything to do with Justin Timberlake also removing the from Facebook? Was it to try to simplify?
It might predate that.
You never know. I mean, I feel like a lot of people simplified after that moment. First Steve Jobs, saying 1,000 songs in the pocket. Then Justin Timberlake saying remove the from Facebook. Monumental moments in the lifespan of business. Okay, so NASA is something that I think the absolute majority of Americans know of, but have no idea the complexity and the maybe even the audacity of how much they want to change the world. And just hearing and researching so many different pieces of it. I learned maybe a month or two ago that the Super Soaker is a NASA invention in some way.
I've heard that. I don't know the origin, though. That's an interesting one.
Yes, that one was wild. And there's the sticky note. Did I hear that one is 3M, the stick part of it, maybe?
It could be. I mean, adhesives were a big thing early on.
My point is, so many things. We think
Right.
of space, and it's just so much more than just rocket going up.
Yeah, or a shuttle.
A shuttle. Is that something you just been in inventor mode your entire life?
I mean, I'm an engineer, right? So we take the discoveries that scientists make and turn them into reality. So yes, I guess you could call that invention.
So was NASA engineer always was that your childhood dream?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, probably. I don't know about NASA in particular, but definitely the space program. I was a big Star Trek fan, of course, and Star Wars. Equal opportunity. I was a Next Generation guy, right, from the 90s.
It's a big battle for that.
Yeah, not so much the original series, but definitely the Next Generation. And I wanted to go into some kind of space-related field. So I knew pretty early on I wanted to be aerospace engineer, mechanical engineer, something like that.
Is Star Trek the thing that got you into that world?
Yeah, probably. For sure.
Why do you like one compared to the other?
Probably the years. I mean, Next Generation was live when I was in middle school, into high school. So it was, that formative years when I was watching TV and reading books and novels, things like that.
It is. It's interesting. Last time we saw you was the State of the Innovation address. That was our inaugural event, and we timed it really, really well. April 1st, also the day of the Artemis 2 launch. So it was a big day.
Yeah.
I don't think that we planned it very well as far as today goes, but it was a really successful day for NASA and for NASA Langley in general. What has happened? What are some of the highlights that happened
Right.
with the successful launch and return?
Yeah. So, I mean, that mission was incredible. We were hoping it was going to happen, around that same time frame, but had no idea, that exact day. It was not an April Fool's joke. Yeah, I mean, it was a culmination of quite a few years worth of work, going back at least 15 years in some cases for people. It's kind of indicative of how long it takes to put a complicated space system together. The human capsule side of it goes back, to 2009, when we came out of the Columbia disaster. The agency was in a rebuilding mode, and they wanted to put together a new human space transportation system, right? We knew that the shuttle couldn't last forever. It was a complicated piece of machinery. So what was going to be the follow-on? And that's where Orion, or the multi-purpose crew vehicle, kind of started. SLS, Space Launch System, came around later. There were a couple iterations after the initial design phase, but yeah, I mean, there's people who started and probably retired on parts of Artemis, what is now Artemis. And then seeing those 4 astronauts go out around the moon, incredible.
I was surprised to hear, Tim and I got to tour NASA Langley a couple months ago, and like, one of the things was there was not a lot of great images of the backside of the moon, or is the dark side of the moon? Dark side of the moon, that's a song, I don't know. But like some parts of the moon, like that was interesting to me. So like one of your teammates was so like excited to see the like super HD images of the moon, and I just thought, I figured we would have had that by now, but no. And now, have you seen some of these images? Like,
I have.
Like some craters are named after people, I heard, or something like that. Like,
yeah, that's pretty common.
Okay.
On the moon.
How do we get something named up there? Like, is that hard? Like, give a couple bucks, it's like a brick.
I mean,
on a brick.
That's probably coming to a site near you, I'm sure.
There you go.
There you go. Another revenue stream for NASA to start naming craters. Because you can buy a star, right?
You can.
How many people have the same star, though?
Well, what do they say? There's as many stars as there are grains of sand on all the beaches. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, that grain of sand is going to be mine then. So just thoughts on it, after it's been a few bits of time since the landing back and going out, like just being a part of that. Like, what are your thoughts afterwards?
I mean, just very thankful that they were able to complete the journey with very little issues.
Are any of the pieces of the launch itself back at NASA Langley?
Not yet.
Will they return?
I would expect that we will get some pieces.
Wow.
We do a lot of the aerodynamics and aerothermal dynamics, looking at heat shields. So reentry is a big deal for us. Ascent also, but definitely the reentry. So I'm guessing that we're going to get pieces of the heat shield to analyze, compare back to Artemis 1. If you remember, there was, some issues and kind of questions about the heat shield's performance during the reentry of Artemis 1, which was uncrewed. And so there's some, work that the team will do at NASA Langley with the folks at Ames.
It's got to be difficult because you're going to the moon.
Yes.
And it's not like...
Well, I'm not going to the moon.
Right, but like to try to diagnose or to like prototype something in a situation like that where you don't do it every day. Literally, it's one of how many times over 50 years, the first time in 50 years, I think I saw, or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can't test that like crazy. And then maybe the craziest number out of all of it was coming back, it went 32,000 miles an hour or something like that.
Yeah.
Ridiculous.
I was hovering 70 on the way down here, and I felt like that was fast. So like, how do you test that? Like because that was manned. Like how does stuff like that, and then the heat shield, like how is any of that done to manipulate?
Yeah, it's a piece part kind of thing, right? The best integrated end-to-end test is to go fly it. But on the Earth, we have to do each piece kind of individually, and it's a mix of the heat. So moving 32,000 miles an hour as you hit the atmosphere, that creates a lot of heat, a lot of friction. So you're doing what are called arc jet tests, where heating a gas and seeing the plasma flow over the heat shield. You do aerodynamic tests in wind tunnels. You do materials testing, strength testing. You do analysis and simulation of the parts that you can't test in any kind of physical way on the surface of the Earth. And then you kind of put it all together and see how the end-to-end should work. And then you go fly it.
Then there's a human aspect of it too, where they got to be able to handle what's the G-force and something like that.
So they do a pretty good job of limiting the G-force on the astronauts. That's something that they learned back during Apollo. Huh. But it's still not 0, right, or 1. It's in the 4 to 5 G range if I remember right.
Okay, so that's something like a roller coaster range.
Is it?
Yeah.
Are you? I think some roller coasters get high like that.
I think fighter pilots.
Yeah.
They hit what 7, 8.
7, 8, I would say.
That's where they gray out or black out, like in there.
Yeah, you get the tunnel vision. Now that's a nominal like scenario, right? I mean, the astronauts no fuzz on the training they have to go through, because in an abort scenario, you're talking, in excess of 10 Gs.
Oh, are you a fan of the G?
The G? Say more.
Okay, well, this is the question I've been wanting to ask you. So you're from Pennsylvania.
Yes.
Do you like roller coasters? Are you into amusements? Like, is that thrill aspect of?
Yes.
Okay.
Of course.
And there's a lot of amusement parks in Pennsylvania.
There are.
You have Kennywood in Pittsburgh.
That's right.
You got Dorney Park over in Allentown.
That's
you got
right.
This little one in the middle that most people don't. Well, Hershey Park in Hershey.
That's right.
And then you got this other one in this little place called Elysburg called, oh Lord, I can't think of what it's called.
Are we talking about Idlewild?
Nope. See, this whole time I've been excited about this. They have one of my favorite wooden roller coasters in the world.
Okay.
It's called Phoenix.
Okay.
And it's at a park that I can't remember now. It's just so silly.
Eastern or western side
Middle.
of the state? Middle. Okay.
I think it's off of 15.
Oh,
You've never
wow.
been, obviously.
So north of Williamsport.
No, I would say probably southwest.
West. Okay. Wow. I have to ask my wife.
Yeah, we're going to have to do some research.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Chris, we need.
This is terrible. As soon as I see it, I'm going to be like...
Because you said...
Knoebels.
Knoebels. Okay.
Have you ever been to Knoebels?
I have not, but my wife has.
Knoedels.
I know Knoebels.
It's kind of like a... What are the ones where they... Like Virginia Beach has the thing at Mount Trashmore where they like bring them in. It kind of has that feeling of it.
Okay.
But it's in kind of like the woods, and their big claim to fame is this ride called Phoenix. Great ride. A lot of it has this double up and then a double down.
Okay.
And they like to restore roller coasters. So things that maybe have burnt down, they will like reconfigure in some sort of way.
Interesting.
To do.
I did not know that part.
So they had 2 or 3 coasters there. They've done some bobsled. They have the bobsled, the twister, and Phoenix. So Pennsylvania is a big amusement park land.
Of course.
Does that have anything to do with your love for the G-force, the G?
The G-force. Okay. I see it all comes back to the G-force. Yeah. So when I was in high school, we did one of our field trips to Kennywood. And I'd been to Kennywood before, but they opened up a new coaster at Kennywood that was supposedly the highest G-force.
Steel Phantom.
Coaster, the Steel Phantom.
Mm-hmm. Pittsburgh.
And yeah, I think I rode that like 6 times in a row.
They've actually manipulated that ride since. So that goes into a ravine at the bottom. So
That's
it
right.
plays off the hill. And it used to have 2 or 3, maybe 4 inversions. Now they've removed the inversions because it hurt people's heads so much. And now they've just made it more like an Apollo's Chariot style, just hills.
I like the negative G. The negative G's.
Yeah. Favorite roller coaster ever?
Ooh, ever. Let's
And
see.
you think about yours too.
I mean, I'm gonna go local. I love Alpengeist,
Okay. Interesting.
but yeah, I'd say that's, well, I don't know. The Griffin is pretty cool. The overhang where you just
Yeah.
kind of sit there and you don't know what the timer's gonna show when you're plunged below
I
negative.
think
Like
the Griffin is the newest roller coaster. I've not been on any of the newest ones or new additions
Yep.
since. The line's always too long.
Now, if you like wooden roller coasters, Invader is not bad. That's at Busch Gardens as well. And kids like that one.
Yeah, I guess Apollo's Chariot is just it is a classic. I mean, with the negative G, it's smooth. As I get older, yeah, I don't do good with the knocking of the head and whatnot.
If you like Apollo's Chariot, I am the opposite. I'm not a big fan of the negative Gs. There's a racing coaster now down at Epic Universe. We were just there to visit for vacation, and they opened up a new Universal Park, and they have a coaster right in the middle of the park, Stardust Racers. If you ever get down there, it's like Apollo's Chariot but on steroids.
The Intimidator, is that what it is? King's Dominion?
You been on that?
Yeah. That was that they had to slow down as well.
They had to manipulate that after a while too, because too many people after the first hill. So it's 305 up, which is the Intimidator's number, or I don't know. So it goes up 305, and then it did a quick turnaround, and I guess at the bottom it had too many G's, and they had to raise it a little bit so that people wouldn't gray out so much.
Yeah, that was fun.
Millennium Force for me, Cedar Point.
Cedar Point.
No question, great ride.
Yeah, I've been on that as
26
well. But I've only been to Cedar Point once.
So I think about your time in Pennsylvania and Star Trek.
Yes.
And then just like me back in the day, I wanted to be an engineer to build roller coasters. That obviously didn't come to fruition. But like, how does NASA recruit? Is it just like, hey, like you want to go to the moon? Or do you try to like get in and convince kids like, hey, like roller coasters are the thing. It could be the moon too. Star Trek is still cool. Like, how do you convince the next wave of talent like this is the place where you should go? Because I think a lot of places across the board, not just NASA, struggle with how do we get people to see like what we're doing is cool.
Yeah, I think NASA, even to this day, still gets quite a boost from just the name, right? People want to work at NASA.
Well, and now with being able to do the in-studio coverage before the launch, and all the interviews and backstories and everything, I mean, like that has to be a huge recruiting tool.
Right. Well, and it used to be back in the day, right? We'd launch something maybe once a quarter, maybe
I
once.
remember back in the day, they would wheel out the TV cart into the auditorium at middle school, and we would watch the launch.
Yeah, it's quite a bit different now with things launching, like we were talking about earlier, Tim, in some cases every week, every couple days. So it's more present, I think, for people who are in middle school forming their opinions about what they want to do. But that said, it is something that we have to confront. I think there's a lot more competition for talent to go into other fields, other parts of aerospace. It's a much bigger field. I mean, I remember in high school telling my high school guidance counselor I want to go into aerospace engineering, and they were like, "You sure you want to do that?" They go through boom and bust cycles. So you could be out of a job for years at a time and have to go do something else. That's not the case anymore. The job market's fairly robust.
I feel like we're just getting ready to hit a terrible pun. I didn't even think about it now, but a brave new world in the sense of like before, like when you think about Christopher Columbus sailing the ocean blue and then discovering America, like we're now to the point where like leaving Earth to find the next place that we're going to civilize humanity. I mean, we're experiencing like a modern day Christopher Columbus type of exploration, and it's wild to think about.
Yeah, starting with the moon onto Mars. I mean, fairly easy destinations, but beyond that, there's quite a bit of other places to go explore and potentially live.
The craziest thing about Mars that I heard, you were there too, isn't getting there. Apparently, it takes a long time to get there. 6 months, something
2
like
years.
that.
Well, the orbit aligns every 2.
Yes,
Yeah, 26 months.
Yeah, so you get there. How long does it take to get there?
It depends, but usually it's 7 to 10 months.
Which is ridiculous in itself. And then you have to wait. You do it, you do your shindig there. You have your little party. You're like rah rah, your little Super Bowl. Then you gotta wait 18 months or so for the orbit. That's just ridiculous in itself. Like, I didn't know that.
Well, I think the thing that's crazy to me is like when you're on the moon or Mars, the gravity is so different.
Yeah.
They launch horizontally because the gravity isn't there to hold them down. So they don't have to launch vertically.
Mm-mm.
So they can just catapult them out like a roller coaster. They just
Interesting.
Yeah.
And they just how fast are they going to that?
Well, it depends, right? The escape velocity depends on the mass of the object. So getting off the moon's a lot easier than getting off Mars.
But not 32,000 miles an hour.
Not 32,000 miles.
Got it.
But the moon is, I mean, that's why people think the moon can be not a launching pad, right? Because there's no atmosphere and it's, a lot less gravity. So it's a lot easier to launch off of the moon.
So people think that we can inhabit that the same way that we do here? Like that's a realistic thing? I mean, I know I saw the stuff at Langley, but like that's because it's comparable to here? Like what's the...
Are you talking about the moon or Mars?
Well, let's go with both.
Okay. So the moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so it's essentially a vacuum. So it would look a lot more like versions of the International Space Station. Larger structures, of course, because you're on the surface. But it would be pressurized, some kind of habitat. So that's what you've probably seen at NASA Langley, either inflatable or constructed. You'd rather use the materials that are already there than launch them there. Mars is a little different, right? Because it's got an atmosphere, but it's CO2, so not something that you can just kind of take your, we're not going total recall here. You can't just take off your mask and be all right. So it's low density CO2. So something would have to happen at Mars to make that atmosphere breathable. Go down all those paths, terraforming, things like that.
Wild. I mean, like, has it been determined?
Way over my head.
Is there precious metals on the moon? Has that been determined?
So I don't know about determined, right? That's a pretty strong term.
Sure.
I think there's a lot of geological, there's a whole field of study about, rock formations of the planets.
Because it's just wild in the sense of we're talking like many spaceships going to the moon, but then they're going to launch them right back. They could load them up with whatever.
That's right.
Supplies that we would need if there is in fact the precious metals or rare.
They wouldn't be so rare.
Yeah, and then sending it back to the Earth. I mean, it's just so there'd just be a continuous.
The more rich, dense of certain elements are probably in the asteroids, but then that creates some kind of interesting dynamics too. You could mine the asteroids and bring that straight back to Earth, or it's a lot easier to get an asteroid, kind of nudge it, have it land
I've
on the
listened
moon.
to several podcasts about how they nudge those asteroids. It's just or land on them to mine them for those precious metals. It's
Are there any movies that like accurately depict any of this stuff?
Oof. Let's see. So, did you ever see the movie Moon with I forget the actor's name? He's basically the only character in the movie, where he's kind of like a DNA copy, and he works on the moon mining it. That's probably a good depiction of what mining the moon might look like. There's some other movies that are come close, right? Armageddon is not anywhere close, but
so you don't want to miss a thing.
Right, exactly.
Fun fact, I believe that was Aerosmith's first #1 hit on Billboard, which is crazy to think.
That is insane. Given they go back
70s. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I said, they didn't want to miss a thing.
Where does NASA get where do they get their next ideas? Like in terms of, hey, this is what we need to accomplish. Yep. This is what we need to determine.
So there are groups of people, right, who do that. That's their job, right, is to look 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. In fact, I
can't even imagine what the strategic vision of NASA would look like that far down.
And if we could stick with it, right? I mean, that's the challenge, because there's so many inputs, right?
Yeah. Because
But
I
yeah.
would imagine there would be like a full-on living civilization or colony.
In 30 years?
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, it took about 20 years to build the space station. And, I think we've gotten a little bit better at in-space construction since then. And then again, you can get everything to the moon and kind of assemble it once you're on the moon.
To your point of like 30 years later, in the last 3 to 5 years, it seems like artificial intelligence has gone very mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
What's NASA's thoughts on things like that, and kind of where do you think that's kind of heading?
So the government-wide, we have a policy with respect to AI. I see it as being a very important tool that we use. I don't think it's going to, create a group of people being not available to do things, right? I think it's kind of like the steam engine. It will be a tool that we use and that frees up people to do other things. We spend a lot of time, even at NASA, doing things routinely, very, tedious. We can clear the deck of all those kinds of things and kind of leverage AI to help us put more effort into thinking 20 or 30 years ahead. I think that's really the future.
And I think we're seeing a lot of that now in the sense of just with so many other public space companies.
Oh yeah.
That allows you all to think about and do the experimentation needed for the really, really challenging things.
Oh yeah. Yeah. There's so many more players in the game now. If you think back to even Apollo or even the space shuttle, it was prime contractors working essentially at the direction of the government to do very specific things. Yes, there was some entrepreneurial aspects to that, but it was mostly at the behest of the federal government. Now that's a wide open market. People doing things kind of in cooperation with or in parallel to, but not necessarily at the direct direction of the federal government.
To someone who wants to take a patent, a piece of technology, and see how NASA can get intertwined with it, can see how it can elevate it, how do they go about doing so?
So if somebody external has an idea, right, they can come to any NASA center, usually has like a front door. Actually, they're getting ready to call it the NASA front door to leverage, talent or facilities or a researcher's particular area of expertise to kind of advance their idea. We do the reverse too, where we've come up with something and we don't really need to use it immediately, or it may have another use. And then we license that out for other people to pick up and create a company around. Is
it usually as simple as someone like knowing what they're looking for on both sides of it? Or is it kind of like, because I've seen the database before.
Yep.
The website with all the stuff. And are they just looking like, oh, yep, model 4730, that's like, that's what they're looking for? Or like, how do they, because Olivia, was that her name? The lady that we interviewed?
Oh gosh.
Disregard, apologize. Yeah. But I was like, so, to the layman, people don't grasp what they're watching and stuff like that. She's like, well, so many things happen afterwards that we end up using in our day-to-days that we don't normally think about.
Right.
And I guess that's what I'm getting at. Is like, how does that happen? Like, how does the tool that we end up using every day, the microwave, the toaster oven, become the thing that we didn't know, but NASA created it? I don't know that that's actually the thing that you guys created, but how does that happen? How does the thing that went to the moon now becomes the thing that we use?
Whew. Well,
because it happens a lot.
It does happen a lot. Some of it is dumb luck, right? And you hope to not have to.
Well, that's fine.
Somebody put something, left it out, or was hitting it with microwaves and noticed that it got hot, right? That's your microwave example. Wasn't an intentional development until later on. I think we're a little smarter today about the potential of some of the things that we're inventing, both in the private space and in the NASA federal space. But there's still a lot of discussion, matchmaking that has to go on. Like, what is it that you think this could do? here's what it does, and somebody else reads that and says, well, I don't know if I agree with what you think it could do, but given what you've described, I think I could use it.
Well, I am really looking forward to the hypersonic aspect. I am ready to be able to get on a plane and get to wherever I need to go to in half the amount of time.
Yes.
And is that NASA Langley is focused on hypersonics?
Oh, yes.
Is it from a commercial standpoint, or is it just from a rocket standpoint? Both?
So it's been a focus in both ways. I think it kind of started as some of the access to space was opening up, maybe 20, 30 years ago. There was quite a bit of development around what is called single stage to orbit. This idea of taking something like the space shuttle, which isn't a single stage to orbit vehicle, right? It had the solid rocket boosters and the fuel tank and all that, where you could essentially take off, go straight to orbit, and then also come back. That is a challenge that's very difficult to overcome, but at the core of it is propulsion and aerodynamics related to hypersonic flight. So there's that aspect to it. There's also the idea of civil transport, right? So taking something like, a supersonic transport and pumping up the volume beyond.
Because one of the things that's really interesting is that I never realized the Concorde could only fly transatlantic.
That's right.
It could not travel west. It couldn't go over land. It only can go over the ocean. So, but the technology, someone created the technology. Was it NASA that reduced the sound of the sonic boom?
That's right. Yeah. So there's actually an active X-plane program right now called X-59. That's the whole goal, is shaping the sonic boom so that when you land or depart an airport, you're not shaking everybody's windows and their china and their cabinets.
Do you think that could lead the way to?
I mean, that's the goal, right? The goal is to limit the footprint of the, disturbances that people feel, right? I mean, we're sitting here, in an area in Hampton Roads, right, that has jet noise all the time.
Yeah.
So maybe we don't necessarily think of it, but if you, live anywhere else, right, it's a presence that you don't want to hear.
Oh, so that's interesting. So thing works, but it won't get adopted because thing is screwing with people's lives too much in a negative way.
Yep.
Interesting. Partnerships is in your title?
That's right. Yep.
There is a lot of organizations here that have a crazy identity, kind of like NASA does, right? The world's largest naval base, things like that. How do you guys look at partnerships? Is it hey, this new startup down the street that's got 3 smart guys from wherever that you're looking at? Or you guys, what?
No. It's just
you never know what to expect. Is it stuff like with the ocean, like the China cabinet that's shaking? How do you look at partnerships from who you're trying to work with strategically in an area that has so many? I mean, there is Ferguson. They make a lot of faucets, so that might help. I don't how do you look at partnerships?
So it's a good question. So there's several aspects to it. First of all, we don't generally go looking to partner with an industry that doesn't have some connection to NASA's mission, right? So if you're making glassware, right, maybe it's not part of NASA's mission. But then again, if it has some connection to windows on the Orion vehicle that we spoke about earlier, or the space shuttle windows, if you rewind the clock 30 or 40 years, maybe there is a connection, right? So sometimes it's, coming back to the question about how do we know whether an invention or a patent might have connection? Sometimes we don't, but often there's a connection. So if it's something that we could use or that we could partner to develop together, that falls into...
Is NASA going to be the one to issue business licenses to the businesses that are created on the moon? I mean,
that's a great question. Maybe.
When you think about the amount of entrepreneurship that's going to be required on the moon, it's going to be next level bananas.
Well, and given that it's, an international, it's like the international waters, right? Nobody really owns it. It's going to be,
there's just a lot of stuff that that has to be thought about. I mean, is there even going to be a currency? How does all that work?
crypto. And look, if NASA is going to be the one that distributes business licenses, let's make it a little bit easier for those businesses to do business wherever elsewhere. Okay?
Well, the sad part is if it follows how like commercial launch has gone, NASA will transition that to Small Business Administration or something like that.
I mean, it's just it's wild to think that, and that's going to be here before we realize it.
Well, I mean, our administrator is very adamant that he wants to essentially throw a bunch of things to the moon's surface, right? He I was at the National Space Symposium not too long ago, and he got up in front of everybody and essentially, and I'm paraphrasing him here, I want to create a junkyard on the moon. Let's put stuff on the moon. Let's not worry about it being all
assemble
boutique.
It later?
Well, maybe we
Just
don't
to
even
figure
assemble
out?
it. We just want to put stuff on the moon so that we're kind of moving the ball forward. Because our normal our normal MO, maybe to the detriment of NASA, is we will study the problem. We'll make sure it's a boutique, bespoke, everything fits together.
Because I guess it goes back to the launch cadence, and if you can continue to increase that launch cadence and then stockpile whatever needs to be stockpiled, but just having that practice and the routine of continuous launching.
Well, I mean, the more you do something, the better you get at it, right? And I think that's been the lesson of the launch vehicle market, as we were speaking about. But I think the same would apply to going to the lunar surface. If we only go to the lunar surface once every 10 years,
It'll take a long time.
It's going to take a long time. It's going to be difficult. Maybe some of the people that worked on it the first time aren't around the second time. But if you're going every month, completely different story.
I hear just innovation in that statement.
Oh, for sure.
Like just someone that is interested in just innovating as much as possible and figuring it out, and you learn from that. And I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Does NASA have like a suggestion box for all the innovation that needs to happen?
Yeah, so coming back to partnerships, right? Each of the NASA centers and the agency as a whole has essentially an open policy of, hey, email us or call us, or soon, I think within the next 2 months, we will have, not joking, a front door where people can go and submit, suggestions or partnering activities with NASA, and NASA will go through and kind of try to decide, okay, your best bet for what you're talking about is to go talk to this person, which is pretty cool. We haven't really had that integrated solution.
I think that it seems like NASA, rightfully so you had to learn a lot from the Challenger era. I mean, do you think that the corner has been turned, that we're now full steam ahead again to...
I mean, that's a tough question, right?
It is tough.
You had the Challenger, before Challenger, you had Apollo 1. You had the issue in flight on Apollo 13. After Challenger, you in some cases culturally repeated the same mistakes with Columbia. I don't think we're ever going to get away from people, humans making mistakes, even with AI helping us.
The robots make enough mistakes on their own.
Yeah, of course.
But that's just the crazy thing. You look at something like a shuttle or a rocket, and you think about just our cell phones are constantly getting updates, whether if it's app updates or operating system updates, and that's just a phone. And you think about the equivalent of how many phones are on a rocket that have to perform flawlessly, pre-launch, launch, and then to come back. I mean, it's just the amount people totally underestimate how much has to go right.
Well, and they take for granted things that we have here terrestrially don't exist, once you get outside of low Earth orbit.
Any idea how many sensors are on?
Oof.
I mean, it's
on Artemis in general?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's got
tens to hundreds of thousands. I mean, the data channels alone are, where you're just taking vehicle health data,
right?
Temperature,
I mean, I would imagine
pressure.
each heat shield probably has several sensors on each individual one.
If a roller coaster train has a lot of sensors, there's no doubt an Artemis has a ton.
Yeah.
I mean, just wild.
Of course, the limiting factor is either storing the data or communicating it, right? Because you have to send the signal back to the dish network, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it in the sense of just with sending stuff to the moon.
Mhm.
It's essentially the same thing that SpaceX did with Starlink. You know, they just continue to send Starlink satellites.
That's
up,
right.
Send them up, send them up, send them up, and now, I mean, that's just a huge revenue driver
Right.
for them.
But again, like in low Earth orbit, you've got, you know, many comm satellites, you've got GPS, you've got a whole infrastructure built around the Earth. Don't have that at the moon. Like we're NASA's currently working with partners to determine, like, okay, how do we have like a good time basis, right, for lunar space, right? On Earth, you've got many options, right? GPS is one that I think all of our phones use. Don't have GPS at the moon. So how do you like have a referenceable time that everybody, because time is important, because you're trying to keep things in sync. What is our time basis at the moon?
We know.
No, we don't. That's you know, we need to figure that out.
So it's like a casino where they don't want clocks and they don't want you to see the outside world. That's like what the moon is.
Yeah,
That's what we're
although if we follow the casino model, we're going to go bust pretty quickly, because if something on one side of the moon doesn't know the time relative to something on the other side of the moon, you know, you could be in a really bad place.
Just the whole thing it's so much to think about.
Yeah.
In terms of the construction of sending like in terms of how you construct the solar flares, or not flares, but the solar panels.
The arrays, yeah.
The arrays to absorb the energy from the sun. Because remember when we took that tour and you know we were down in the simulated crater and they construct.
No, that was a simulated crater. I just put that together.
Yeah, and then they need a tower essentially with something on top to be able to deploy the solar array.
I understood the tower. Now I understand. Okay, interesting.
Because you know, for science and for permanent presence on the moon, right? The interesting stuff tends to be down in the craters, because you've got shadow regions that potentially have water, ice, potentially, you know, things that then you don't have to launch there from Earth.
Yeah,
makes a big difference.
How do you personally handle like negativity, right? So like NASA's an interesting world where I think some people are gung ho about it, some people aren't gung ho about it. Like, how do you handle just the complexities of that, and maybe there's some negativity around it? Like, how do you handle that?
Well, with respect to NASA, I think I have to respect other people's opinions. We do a lot of good. We do some things that maybe take a little bit more thought behind them.
Just the whole education process behind it all.
Oh, yeah.
Just to educate the public.
Yes.
They're like, oh, they scrubbed another mission. They
Oh, yeah.
scrubbed another launch.
They're going to the moon.
Well, that's just it. You know,
What do you expect? Like,
Right.
you can't even get to Wawa on your own. Like,
People get frustrated for sure. And you know, I mean, we live in a society that's used to, you know, everybody's got a phone, right? You're not waiting for the newspaper the next day to tell you what happened.
yeah, but you just had 7 to 10 months to Mars. Like,
Yeah.
that's a lot of Instagram like scroll sessions. Like that.
Yes.
I think that's the biggest piece. Of what are you going to do to entertain yourself
Oh yeah.
for 7 to 10 months?
Well, and what you know, there's a lot of good stuff that whoever would be on board that ship would be doing in that transit time, right? So how do you make that part of the mission interesting?
So they don't watch Netflix.
I mean, I'm sure they watch Netflix.
Oh, so they have accounts up there?
Yeah, I mean, they might.
Come on, you know this, Joe. Like,
Well, so each of the astronauts has personal like gear,
okay,
right? And a lot of them have like an iPad, and they do have the internet. So I would guess that some of them might have Netflix or HBO Max.
A little Sleepless in Seattle tonight.
Yes.
All right.
Or download,
yeah.
if you remember The Martian, right? I mean,
Yes. I
yes,
mean,
of course.
is that you didn't bring that up in movies, so I figured that was all fake. So like, he didn't really make a potato, is what you're telling me. Matt Damon has nothing to do with it.
Well, so Andy Weir's novels do tend to have quite a bit of realism in them. He works quite closely, out in Southern California. It's local with Jet Propulsion Laboratory, so they tend to have more, I'd say, more realism than some other space-based movies.
I mean, I jokingly, but in the same way, like all these things relate to people and talent coming back, right?
Oh, for sure.
And if people see something like you in Star Trek at back, I think you said Star Wars too, but like all these things, all it takes is one little trigger. And if that's the thing that gets you close to it, like that's an incredibly important thing. And that's why I was asking, like, how does NASA recruit? Because maybe you partner, with some of these movies so that it can happen and give them a little more realism, because people talk about the talent in this area and how they don't want it to leave as being such a big struggle. It's like, well, are we actually doing enough to say hi?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing that we've talked about both locally and at the agency level. Coming back to, I think the name still carries a lot of weight. I think, for a long time, that was the only thing carrying the recruiting ball. I think that's, with competition, good competition, right? I think SpaceX, some of the other, larger firms and smaller firms are taking a lot of the talent. How do we fit in there, right? How do we get out and kind of, hey, we're still doing things that would interest you as a early career employee. So I think, we are going to have to do more out in the community than probably we've done before, especially as we're going to hire a decent number of folks over the next several years.
The number of people that watched the Artemis 2 launch. I mean, I can't remember what it was. Millions.
It's, you only get so many of those, focusing events, and that was certainly one. Every time we land on Mars is another one, right? People want a lot of eyeballs on that. But yeah, Artemis was off the charts.
So I'm watching the launch, and then they have humans across the water. I think there's a body of water, maybe. And there's cameras. How far is that distance?
You're talking about at Cape Canaveral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a couple of miles, right?
Yeah, it's more than 2 miles.
Okay, and am I still feeling it there?
You'll feel something after it gets off the launch pad. There's a delay effect. You'll see it.
Okay.
And then you'll hear the rumble, and then you'll feel a little bit.
And so NASA determined at some point that 2 miles plus is the safe distance. Safe is,
Well, it's just,
but
there's a lot of propellant.
Yeah.
Well, that is great. Like I see it, and then you're just like, wow. Like I wonder, like.
I mean, just like when you look.
Yeah.
At that whole orange piece. That's all. That's all propellant.
Yeah, it seems wild.
The first stage. Yeah.
It's a flying gas can.
Okay, and so people just willingly go there, and they're just like, I just want to watch, and like that's.
Oh yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, Kennedy and Cape Canaveral have a really good kind of set of places you can go watch.
I suppose that one kid that grabbed the spotlight that went viral.
Oh yeah,
I mean that certainly helps too. Right?
Yeah,
the
for
kid
sure.
who cussed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to the moon with another word in there.
Yeah.
That was great.
Yeah, I think he was on the causeway, which back during the shuttle era was very popular to get a causeway pass. And that's where you've probably seen, videos of like their stands set up. The water's right there. You're kind of looking out over the water at the two, what used to be the 2 shuttle pads. One of them is leased by SpaceX now.
Because it is kind of difficult to understand, like to see that and be like, okay, how am I comprehending this from a TV when it's so 2 miles? I mean, I didn't think it was 2 miles away.
Or just the fact of how many people are involved to make that possible.
Oh, for sure.
And I think that, I think one of the biggest things that really challenges that our region has is just how humble everyone is that lives in our region, whether if it's the Navy SEALs or people at NASA. I run through our neighborhood, my neighborhood, and it's just. And I'll look at license plates, and there's so many NASA license plates that are around, and I just think to myself, I wonder what you would do on a day-to-day basis, or what you do on a day-to-day basis. And everyone is just extremely humble, but they love what they do. It's hard to get, not get rid of them is not the right word, but like it doesn't appear that people are itching to retire anytime soon because they love what they do.
No, I think, one of the things that brings people to NASA in general, certainly at Langley, is the mission, right? I mean, and that comes back to the recruiting piece, right? there's still a heavy percentage of people who are in it because they love space, because they want to make a mark, to be able to, you know, improve humanity in some way or fashion.
Yeah, mission focused.
Well, even they're going back to the guy sweeping the floor,
Mm-hmm.
putting a man on the moon.
That's
You
right.
know that story, Zach?
No, but I mean, one of my favorite quotes ever is from a NASA movie with Hidden Figures.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was cool to see that that's from here.
Yeah.
Based here.
Yeah, I mean, some of those, you know, historic facilities are still there.
What do you hope to see achieved before you decide to call it quits?
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, I mean, I would really like to see us do something on the moon that's permanent, right? I mean, permanent is a strong word, right? Because nothing's truly permanent. But I mean, we've had an International Space Station in orbit for over 20 years, right? Fully complete. Humans have been living in orbit continuously over that entire period of time. To see something like
what's
that.
the timeline? There's a plan to deorbit.
That's right.
What's the timeline for that?
So I think right now the timeline is to fly it out until 2030, which is not as far away as it sounds.
So is there plans then to construct a Gen 2 ISS?
So the current idea is that there is, and there are currently several commercial companies looking to put up their own space stations. And so the idea would be, hey, we're going to have some version of a web of commercial, what they call them, commercial LEO destinations, low Earth orbit. I think NASA's plan, more or less, is to look to commercial space to fill low Earth orbit, and then for us to focus on the moon and outward.
What's something people should know about that we haven't talked about?
Ooh, good question. Well, I mean, we hit it a little bit, but I mean, it's important to remember the first A in NASA is aeronautics, right? So National Aeronautics and Space Administration. So, you know, Langley has a tremendous amount of folks working in space, but it's very aero focused, right? So from Hypersonics, but there's a tremendous amount of work going on with, you know, regular aircraft that affect everybody's lives. If you get on an airplane, different things that really do, you know, probably on a more of a daily basis affect your life.
I think that's interesting because like the overall top speed of a 777 has not increased in like a long time.
Right. Yeah, I mean the focus really has been to sit almost as close as you can to the speed of sound and then get as fuel efficient as you possibly can. So most of the innovation over the last 10 years or so has been in lightening up the airframe, improving the fuel economy, right? Because that's one of, you know, those are direct things on the cost of a ticket. And I could see that stuff continuing. I think the downward, back to before I leave, I would love to see some version of a, you know, eVTOL or a personal aircraft, right? To kind of open up the regional market so that you can get from here to DC or here to, you know, the Eastern Shore, Philadelphia, down to Florida, right? And maybe you're not getting on the typical aircraft, right? You're in more of an air taxi.
Yeah, I do. I hope you're right in that regard.
Yeah.
Just in the sense of everyone always talks about this region with the struggle with direct flights, and if we can leverage the VTOL aspect, we could just hopefully skip that.
Yep. Yeah.
Challenge.
I think of it as you know, there's kind of a story, you know, about some of the more developing nations of the world, right? That you know, you go over to one of those nations and the cell service is like triple triply better than locally.
They skipped the whole landline.
They skipped over the landline. And right, for us, maybe the idea is that this becomes a hub in this region for skipping over the hub and spoke idea of, you know, commercial airline and more into the, you know, regional air taxi world, which I think would be great. And, you know, we're kind of set up that way. Getting to New York or DC or Philadelphia or, you know, down to Charleston, South Carolina, easy air taxi range.
That'd be awesome. So instead of, we're not going to name a crater, but Joe, you're in charge of.
Okay.
You've got to bring one food that represents Hampton Roads to the moon.
Ooh, Hampton Roads.
What are you going to pick to be like, this is the dish of Hampton Roads that everyone on the moon is going to.
So I was a big fan. So this area's got. I'm not Greek, but we have a lot of people who have a Greek heritage in the area. So I would probably pick like some kind of like Greek food. Because when I first moved here, that was like a fascination of mine to go to all the Greek festivals. Newport News, living on the South Side. Going to different places. So I could see like a good like pita based food. I could see that. That would be a.
We've asked that question many a times. That's the first time anyone's said it.
Really?
Well, the crazy thing is, because you're in Williamsburg, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like Paul's Deli is like they have a lot of Greek.
Oh, they do. They do. They do. A lot of people at NASA, volunteer in one of the various Greek festivals on the peninsula.
That does attract.
Oh yeah.
A big crowd.
Oh yes.
A little pita and Greek food to the moon. Love it.
It'll be interesting to see. I mean, like I said, there's going to be a lot of entrepreneurship that has to take place and innovation.
Oh yeah.
To make that.
It's an exciting time. There's a lot going on in the world, but now is a fascinating time to be here now on the vanguard, on the forefront of going to the moon and staying.
I'm here for it.
Same. All right, that's it.